Blog Talk Radio.
Bichamo Afurakanu Afuraitkaitnut Neye AKANFO NANASOM Da Medinde Ojirafo Kwesi Ranehem Pata Akan. Akomumai Amarukai Tipi Mu Ojirafo, that means greetings to all Afurakani Afuraitkaitnut people, meaning Africans, black people today. Is AKANFO NANASOM Day, ancient, authentic Akan Ancestral Religion Day. My name is Ojirafo Kwesi Ranehem Pata Akan. Ojirafo of the Akwamu Nation in North America. Yet I say we thank you for tuning in once again to the show. We are opening up the chat room. We're going to place a couple of links in the chat room for the information that we'll be addressing tonight. If you are on the phone line and you have a question or a comment, simply hit the number 1 so we can see your hand is raised. If you are in the chat room and you have a question or a comment, you must log into the chat room in order to interact in the chat room. For the individuals who are new to the broadcast, we have 3 broadcasts on a weekly basis. We have, of course, AKANFO NANASOM, ancient, authentic Akan Ancestral Religion on Joda, Monday nights. On Bena or Abenada, which is Tuesday nights, we have Ojira, which means purification, and we deal with the purification of culture, ancestral religion, philosophy, Ancestry nation building, which is ported by ancestral religion and culture. We clarify concepts, clarify ritual practices, clarify the knowledge of our ancestral culture. It is through purification, or Ojira, that we operationalize our practice of Nanasom, of Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, or African ancestral religion. So we show how ancestral religion impacts every aspect of our lives, how it's not separate from any aspect of our lives. So we go into detail about that, and we also clarify misinformation being propagated by individuals in the Western Hemisphere, misinforming our people about ancestral religion, but also individuals on the continent who have been infected by Christianity and Islam and various aspects of white culture in general, therefore infecting their presentation of ancestral religion, and therefore we receive a misinformed practice, a misinformed culture. And then we engage in self-destructive behavior based on that misinformation. So we clarify concepts, purify knowledge of the culture on Ojira, Purification Day. On Awukuda, or Wednesday, we have Egua, which is Marketplace Day. On Egua Da, or Egua Day, Marketplace Day, we showcase Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit businesses, organizations, and institutions. Those who are serving the Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit community in a positive capacity, but also maintaining our ancestral religious values at the same time. As we showcase these businesses, organizations, and institutions, we have individuals come on to talk about their organizations, their institutions, their businesses, talk about their philosophy of serving the Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit community. We have also published our Okra economic development model. The Okra economic development model is a model of economic development rooted in Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit ancestral religious values. We inherit our ancestral religious practices through our blood circles, no matter where we have migrated to on Asaseafua, our fertile earth mother, or where we have been forced to migrate to. Wherever we are, we inherit our ancestral religious values. We align with the Supreme Being through the agency of the forces in nature and the spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors who are connected to us by blood. So when we deal with an Okra economic development model rooted in ancestral religious values, we're dealing with a holistic approach to economic development, which has not been put forward because many of us, the vast majority of our people, have been corrupted by pseudo-religious practices Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hebrewism, Morishism, pseudo-metaphysics, pseudo-New Age spirituality, all kinds of nonsense that gives us a false idea and a corrupted and truncated view of reality, tainted view of reality, a blurred view of reality. So therefore, we don't know how to operate in harmony with order so that we can attune to our various talents, our potential, and employ those talents and that potential in a harmonious fashion so we can meet our end. We've published the Okom Economic Development Model. You can go to our Okom page on our website. We just put the link in the chat room. Of course, our website is ojidafo.com, ODWIRAF as in free, o.com, and you can go to the Okom page, OKOM, Okom page. You can download that model. You can also download the 4-part series we did on Blog Talk, Okom parts 1, 2, 3, and 4, where we went into detail explicating the model and showing its application to every aspect of our lives. We also have the broadcast Ekwakunti, which is economic warfare, showing in detail that just as our ancestresses and ancestors who were forced into the Western Hemisphere recognized that till they freed themselves from enslavement and established independent, sovereign communities where they were self-governing, self-ruling, and secure in that sovereignty by defending it with military arms and military might. Until they got to that position, every exchange they had with one another, whether it was material, intellectual, spiritual, and so forth, was taking place behind enemy lines. And the same is true with regard to our people today. Every time we exchange information, exchange funds, exchange ideas, we are operating behind enemy lines. So as we understand that, we must recognize that every idea, every material exchange, every financial transaction should be focused on the reality that it should be a strike against the enemy. Every kind of exchange should be used for the liberation of our people. So we deal with that in Ekwakuti, economic warfare. That broadcast is also on the Okom Economic Development page. We also have the broadcast No Kwarefo Ne Amambre, which we deal with self-employment and ancestral culture. We deal with self-employment first and foremost internally, self with a capital S, dealing with the Krawa, the soul, the divine consciousness, the divinity dwelling in our head region, as Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnut people, a force in nature, one of the children of the Supreme Being, directed to dwell within us, in our head region, in our spirit bodies, that force in your head region that draws you towards thoughts, intentions, and actions that are in harmony with divine order and repels you from disordered thoughts, intentions, and actions. Every Afuraitkaitnut individual is assigned a divinity, a force in nature to dwell with us throughout the course of our lives, and it takes up residence in the head region within our spirit body. That divinity is our own personal divinity. And when we align with that force in nature, we align with the divine function we have been given to execute in creation. We also align with our spiritual capacities, our potential that have been encoded within us by the Supreme Being as well. So when we engage our own craft, our own self, our own divinity, then we also attune to the spiritual capacity, our unique configuration of spiritual energy that has been given to us by the Supreme Being. And we utilize our consciousness, our soul, our krawa, to employ the unique configuration of energy we have been given, to employ our own power, so that we can operate in a harmonious fashion in the world with one another. As Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnut people. And when we can engage in such self-employment, then that extends in the mundane level where we can engage in self-employment in a harmonious fashion. So we deal with that in detail, where you have self-employment starting internally and moving externally, so we can engage in economic activity in a harmonious fashion and supporting one another's Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnut people. All of that is on the Okom Economic Development page, including a list of businesses, organizations, and institutions that we have been supporting and will continue to support. We are targeting one business, organization, or institution per week for 52 weeks. We are in week number 18. The reason why we're targeting one business organization or institution per week for capital infusion, is so that they can receive the optimal amount of capital from the community. So therefore, our strategy in the Okon economic development model is to starve the beast and feed the pride. We make an assessment on a weekly basis to determine what funds we would have potentially wasted with the whites and their offspring at their businesses, organizations, and so forth. And we starve that beast and feed the pride. We reallocate those funds away from the enemy and direct them towards the business, organization, or institution of the week. So you can reallocate the $10 you would have spent at Walmart, would have spent at Starbucks, would have spent at various places of business with the whites and their offspring, and reallocate that $10 or $15 to the business, organization, or institution of the week. If 1,000 of our people reallocated that $10 or $15, that means the black business of the week will receive a $10,000 or $15,000 infusion so that they can expand their business, hire our people, expand their services to us, and continue to develop and grow as we are served by them as well. If we do not do so, by default, we allow that $10,000 or $15,000 to remain in the hands of our absolute enemy, the whites and their offspring, and we're servicing them. So we have the list of businesses. It's an ever-growing list. We're on week number 18, so you can see all of that information on the Okon Economic Development page on the website. We have placed the link to one of the articles, the Bena article that we're going to deal with. We also placed the link to the our Nhoma page, our publications page, and you can download the book, Hoodoo People, Afurakanu, Afuraitkaitnut in North America, Akan, Custodians of Hoodoo from Ancient Hoodoo Nduru Land, Kanit, Nubia. We'll be dealing with that book as well tonight. And you can download that from the Nhoma page. Of course, we have, for those who are unaware, to date we have published 16 books, over 60 plus articles. The 16 books you can find on the Nhoma page, the publications page on our website. The ebook versions of all 16 of our books are free downloads for the community. We also have the soft cover versions that we print ourselves in-house on our own printers. We do not contract that out. We sell the soft cover versions of our books. They range between $8 and $11. But the ebook versions are free. You can download them at any time and share them at any time. We also have over 60 articles we have published on the website. You'll see the link to those on the publications page as well. We have over 140 broadcast archives for Blog Talk Radio. So when you look on our Blog Talk Radio page, channel page, you can go and access all of those archives at any time. In addition to that, some of them we have uploaded to our YouTube page as well, so you can check some of those out on YouTube as well. We haven't uploaded all 140 plus, but you can access all 140 plus directly from the Blog Talk page. You can also follow us on the Blog Talk page. Hit the follow button so you can receive all updates via email, and you can also follow us at Ojirafo on YouTube, Ojirafo on Twitter, Ojirafo on Instagram, as well as on Facebook as well. Okay, so we want to get into our topic for tonight. Of course, tonight's show, AKANFO NANASOM, Ancient Authentic Akan Ancestral Religion. We deal specifically with the Akan expression of Nanasom on Joda Monday nights. Number one, because we are Akan. Number two, because there's a great deal of misinformation about the Akan tradition that's being propagated not only by individuals in the Western Hemisphere, but also Akan people on the continent who have been corrupted by white pseudo-culture. We deal with ancient, authentic Akan ancestral religion, Nanasom. So when we talk about ancient and authentic, we're talking about our ancestral religious practices, and this, of course, is the same is true of all Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit ancestral religion, African ancestral religion, no matter what expression, Yoruba, Akan, Igbo, and so forth. But we talk about our ancestrally inherited tradition, going back tens of thousands of years. Our ancestresses and ancestors have transmitted our ancestral religious practices through our blood circle, intergenerationally and transcarnationally. That means through successive lifetimes, through rebirth, through bebra, we continuously bring this culture forward. It is encoded within us initially by Nyamewa, Nyame, the Supreme Being, or an ancestor or an ancestress in the spirit realm, and you go before Nyamewa, Nyame, before reincarnating into a womb. You are assigned an Obosom, a force in nature, assigned to your head region, a divinity to guide you throughout the course of your life, a male divinity if you're male, a female divinity if you're female. That force takes up residence and installs itself in the head region of the individual. Encoded within that force is the function you are to execute within creation and the specific configuration of energy you have been assigned so that you can fulfill that function. And as we're going to talk about tonight, every Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnut individual is a cell within the great divine body of the Supreme Being, Amenet and Amen, as we call Nyamewa and Nyame, the great mother and great father in ancient Kanat, as well as in Akan culture. This is your cells serve your organs, and when they serve the organs, they serve the whole being. You as a cell and we as cells serve our parent organs within the great divine body of the Supreme Being, the great mother and great father. When we serve our parent organs, deities that govern our head and our patriclans and matriclans, we are servicing the great divine body at the same time. Encoded within your spiritual head is your function to execute and the spiritual energy you've been given in a unique configuration to execute that function. That's key. That's culture. That's your way of life. How are you to function, the manner in which you're to function, what are you to incorporate, and what are you to reject? Ancestral Religion, NANASOM, is the ritual incorporation of divine law and the ritual restoration of divine balance. So that means through ritual, we incorporate those things, objects, deeds, and entities we need to incorporate in order to harmonize our thoughts, intentions, and actions with divine order. And through ritual, we reject those things, objects, deeds, and entities we need to reject, to hate, to repel, in order to restore balance to our thoughts, intentions, and actions, and maintain the integrity of divine order. Expansive and contractive poles of NANASOM, Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, Ancestral Religion is the ritual incorporation of divine law and the ritual restoration of divine balance. In our Akan culture, of course, that's across the board, and of course in our Akan culture, that manifests as well. Those who came from ancient Kanat, the Kanit land, ancient Nubia, which is a title of that ancient land, Kanat, the first land, foremost land, the people, Kanit people, migrated to the Western Hemisphere, reestablished ancient Kanat about 2,000 years ago after the decline of ancient Kemet. We reestablished the empire of Kanat, Nubia, or Akana, Ghana, in the western part of the continent. About 1,000 years later, some of our people migrated from northwest Afuraikai and central northwest Afuraikai towards the forest belt and reestablished Akana civilization once again in the forest belt region, where today's Ivory Coast, Cote d'Ivoire, and the Republic of Ghana are. A few hundred years after that, some of our people were taken from those regions and forced during the Musuo Kesi, the Great Perversity, the enslavement era, to the Western Hemisphere, to North, Central, South America, the Caribbean, and Europe during enslavement. This is how the Akan people come from ancient Kanat, Nubia, the ancient empire of Ghana, to the Akan civilization of over 1,000 years ago in the forest belt and into the Western Hemisphere. Of course, we have Akan populations in South America, the Winti tradition, the Winti tradition. The Akan religion in South America is still practiced by AKANFO today. In Jamaica, for example, you have the Akan people still practicing a form of the Akan, the expression is typically called Obia today. In North America, we still practice hoodoo today. The Akan people brought the tradition of hoodoo into North America. And in our book, Hoodoo People, we prove the etymological origin of the term hoodoo coming from undu and unduru, which is medicine, but it also means to conjure. So we deal with that in detail in our book. We also show that undu is also another title of ancient Kanat or Nubia. And the land itself and the people are also called the undu people. So that tradition of undu or hundu coming from ancient Undu land, the Undu people, Hundu people, coming to the Western Hemisphere, eventually into North America. And we're dealing with North America tonight. We're dealing with Okofo Kwabena, called Denmark Vesey or Telemaque, Charleston, and Ancestral Religion. Obviously, Charleston has been in the news because one of the whites in their offspring, one of the parasites, the whites in their offspring, all of whom are our enemies, all who exist, all who have ever existed, and all who ever will exist until we make them extinct. The white Europeans, white Asians, white Americans, white Hindus, white Arabs, white pseudo-Native Americans who are simply Asians. The whites and their offspring, all non-black people, are spirits of disorder. They are spirits without a soul, divine consciousness, a divinity that would normally be dwelling in the head region. They do not have that. And because they do not have that, they are spirits who are disfigured, spirits of disorder. And they operate in that fashion. Quite unnaturally, they will operate in that fashion. It is their nature, their ill nature, to operate in contravention to divine order. So, of course, one of these spirits of disorder murdered 9 of our people. The church that they were murdered in, that the cracker went to murder our people, is a church that Okofo Kwabena and a number of other people founded a couple of hundred years ago. It was the staging ground for one of the greatest organized revolts in the United States. Okofo Kwabena, so-called Denmark Vesey, and his army, they organized over 9,000 Afurakanu, Afuraitkaitnut, African people in South Carolina to massacre the whites and their offspring, free themselves from slavery, and take over the entire city. So we're going to get into detail about that. We're going to get into detail about who he was, who he is, and how he is still speaking to us as one of the great Nananom Nsamanfo. Through this incident, reminding us who he is and reminding us that the job has not been finished. We need to complete his mission, the extermination of our enemies. Those enemies have been murdering our people for not only hundreds of years, but thousands of years, wherever they have been able to, everywhere on the planet. Typically, for thousands of years, we have crushed the whites and their offspring and their military advance. It's really only been within the past 150 to 200 years that they have taken control. We dealt with this in detail in our broadcast, Nanasom, and the defeat of slavery, where we showed that it's ancestral religion, Nanasom, Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, ancestral religion, which was responsible for the end of enslavement in the Western Hemisphere, including North America. So we went into detail about that. It's only been over the past 100 to 200 years the whites and their offspring have gained the upper hand around the world. Recall that it wasn't until after enslavement was over, 1884-85, when the Berlin Conference takes place and the whites and their offspring begin to carve up west and central parts of Afuraitkaitnut. The whites and their offspring were there since the so-called 1400s, but they were not able to take control until the late 1800s, in the 1870s, 1880s. That means the entire period of enslavement, prior to enslavement, during the entire centuries-long event, and afterwards, they were not in control of West and Central and South Afuraitkaitnut or East Afuraitkaitnut. It didn't happen until after enslavement was over. So many people don't understand that true history, and they operate under the foolish ideas that whites and offspring have been ruling us for 500 years, 6,000, all this nonsense. So we clear that up in the broadcast. However, we want to get into detail about who Okofo Kwabena, who we refer to him properly as. We don't, of course, identify our ancestresses and ancestors by the names of the white pervert rapists that enslaved them and tortured them. So we're going to talk about this name, talk about what is connected to, the divinities is connected to, the Obosom is connected to. We're going to talk about his trustery and talk about our responsibility dealing with our absolute enemies, the whites and their offspring. So first, let's deal with some basic trustery of who Okofo Kwabena is. And then we're going to get into the cosmology surrounding the nature of his spirit connected to the forces in nature which prompted and guided his movement. And we're going to deal with how Nanasom Ancestral Religion was at the foundation of that movement. So you can find information across the internet, different sources dealing with Okofo Kwabena, of course, and we'll pull out some basic information, and then we're going to get into some cosmological detail. So, his birth date is uncertain. They believe he was either born in Afuraitkaitnut or born enslaved on the island of St. Thomas in the Caribbean. The island became a center for the enslavement of our people, growing of sugar and cotton. Over 4,000 black people, under 400 whites lived there in the late 12,700s, so-called 1700s. In 12,781, so-called 1781, and of course we utilize this time frame. We are in 13,015. We're in the midst of a 26,000-year cycle. We do not date our calendar based on a fictional cartoon character, Jesus, who never existed of any race whatsoever. So this is why we utilize the time frame properly. We're in the midst of that cycle, hence the years beginning with 13,000, the astronomical cycle, as well as the ritual and spiritual cycle. We're in the midst of that 26,000-year cycle. This is 13,015. So these dates, 1781 would be 12,781. So around that time, when he was about 14, our ancestor Okofo Kwabena, so-called Denmark Vesey, was bought by a slaver called Captain Vesey. And this is where he gets that false label from. There were over 390 Afuraitkaitnut people enslaved by this craft, brought from St. Thomas to Haiti, and then the French colony called St. Domingue. As a boy, our ancestor Okofo Kwabena was sold and put to work on the sugar plantation. Cutting and pulping sugarcane is hard and exhausting work, even for a grown man, but Kwabena did not remain at it for long. One day, as they say, he surprised his fellow enslaved Afuraitkaitnut people on the plantation. He fell onto the ground in an epileptic fit, or a so-called epileptic fit. And because this happened frequently, he was pulled off of the plantation. And then he became a servant in different capacities. They thought it had something to do with him working in the hot fields and so forth. We're going to get into later about this notion of these possessions, just like our Akan ancestress, Nana Araminta, called Harriet Tubman, would fall into possession, Okom, spirit possession. When she came out of spirit possession, she would be able to direct the people how to escape from the plantation without getting caught and so forth, and she led hundreds of our people to safety without losing a quote-unquote passenger on the Underground Railroad, because she would communicate with the Obosom and the Nananum Nsamanfo, the divinities and the spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors of Afuraitkai, through these Okom experiences, these possession experiences, and then she would lead the people. Here, once again, you have one of our Akan ancestresses and ancestors being possessed, falling into what whites and offspring considered an epileptic fit. And that's going to figure into the whole notion of this organizing of the rebellion, of the war against the whites and offspring, which we'll get into later. So they considered him unsound good, and therefore they made him a servant in a different capacity, because they thought he wasn't suited for heavy labor. So they made him a personal servant and so forth. And he began to travel with the Captain Vesey. For years, he saw the horrors of the enslavement of our people, sailing with the captain on his voyages between Afuraitkaitnut and the West so-called Indies. In 12,783, the captain stopped the voyages, settled in Charleston, South Carolina. Kwabena remained enslaved for the next 17 years. At some point, now he's enslaved, he was a personal servant. At some point, he won a lottery in South Carolina. And he won, according to the records, a $1,500 lottery and was able to purchase his freedom. He won a lottery and paid the white so-called master $600, and he freed himself from enslavement. He wanted to purchase his wife and children out of enslavement as well, but the so-called master refused to allow him to purchase his wife and his children from enslavement, and they were still enslaved. So he took the rest of the money that he made and he set up a carpentry shop in South Carolina. So he became a quote-unquote free man or free black in South Carolina as a young man, but his wife and children were still enslaved. So he set up this business. He became a skilled carpenter. They say his business did very well and so forth. A few years later, himself, some say it was a group of other black individuals, some say he was included with that group of black individuals, set up a separate black Methodist church in Charleston because of the treatment, according to conventional truth story, the treatment that they received from the white Methodist church. They say about 1820, the church had about 3,000 members. He was a minister of the church with his growing family of children at his house on Bull Street. He was viewed as a respectable member of the free black community, and so he was. Of course, he had other things on his mind. Since living in St. Domingue in his youth, Kwabena had followed the events there with interest. He was thrilled when he heard about the great uprising of the Afurakanu, Afuraitkaitnut in 12,791, so-called 1791. He was even more thrilled when the so-called slave owners fled and the black people of the former colony took control. In 12,804, so-called 1804, St. Domingue became the independent nation of Haiti, powered by ancestral religion, invoking the forces in nature to empower the people and move the people to wage war against the whites and their offspring and massacre them and take over the entire nation and establish an independent republic. He was, of course, inspired by that ancestral movement, that ancestral religious movement. This was a success story, fired his imagination. If the people in St. Domingue could triumph over their pseudo so-called masters, why not those who were enslaved in South Carolina? Why not those throughout the entire South? Kwabena was aware that previous attempts at rebellion had been put down mercilessly, but the events in Haiti gave him new hope. So he began to, quote-unquote, preach every Sunday at the pulpit, but he began to, as they would say, sow the seeds of rebellion. So he would pick out the little so-called scriptures that reference slavery and freedom from the slave master and freedom from torture and so forth. He picked out these different scriptures, but recalled that he was having, quote-unquote, epileptic fits, but in the Akan tradition that's called Akan. He was being possessed by the Obosom. He was being possessed by the Nananum Nsamafo, the deities and the spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors. They directed him to utilize the only building that Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people were legally allowed to congregate in large numbers, to pull them all together, and that was the so-called church. So they utilized that church as a staging ground for revolution-resolution. The whites and their offspring assumed that these were just good Christians having little Christian services. in reality, they had other motives, ulterior motives that were positive ulterior motives. This was utilized as strategy at this particular time. He became a little bit more open with the strategy, even though it was ensconced in these pseudo-scriptures. So he began to fire the people up outwardly by picking out little portions dealing with freedom from slavery in the so-called Bible. Of course, our people had a yearning to be free. So he was showing them what his Obosom were telling him, showing him what the Nsamampo were telling him, showing them what the Supreme Being, Nyamewa and Nyame, was telling him through code language. We are to be free. The gods and goddesses, the great god and the great goddess, have directed us and blessed this operation of revolution and resolution. Instead of using that terminology, he would utilize little scriptures from the Bible and use them for his own end. At the end of the day, he was still saying, we are being divinely moved to wage war against the so-called slave master. He argued with whites in the street who supported enslavement, and that was an activity that always drew an admiring and awestruck black audience. So imagine in the time one of the only free black people arguing with the whites and their offspring on the street why slavery was immoral and illegal and corrupt and unjust. Many of our people even today refuse to confront the whites and their offspring on any level. He was doing this during the time where there was enslavement. So, 4 years after it was opened, the Black Methodist Church in Charleston was closed down by the whites. Kwabena and many others responded with anger and an intensified desire to fight slavery. As Kwabena traveled from place to place spreading his message, the black people of Charleston area began to look upon him as the one who would lead them to that victory. And he had no difficulty gathering recruits when he started to organize his war of liberation. By 1822 or 12,822, he had carefully arranged a plan of battle and had chosen 4 dependable lieutenants, Ned and Rolla Bennett, who were enslaved by the governor, Peter Poyas, a ship's carpenter, and Gullah Jack, who was widely believed to be bulletproof. He was the priest. He was the hoodoo man. He was the conjurer. And he was the top lieutenant. Kwabena had also gathered a supply of weapons, which he obtained from supporters in Haiti. So he was making international communications even during that time to connect with the brothers and sisters who had already freed themselves and was able to acquire some arms. At the same time, they had a blacksmith that they were working with, which we're going to get into, and they were developing weapons in the blacksmith shop to utilize in the waging of war against the enemy. It's very critical when you learn about this truth, the way the whites and their offspring and brainwashed Negroes spin this story. And we need to bring clarity because we have direct insight, because this is one of our ancestors who still communicates with our people to this day and speaking to us, men and women, Afurakani and Afuraitkaitnut people here in America today through our blood circle. When they say the church was closed down and that engendered a great deal of anger amongst thousands of black people who were part of that church, and it generated and intensified their desire to overcome enslavement, it wasn't because they closed down the church and they wouldn't be able to worship the fake Jesus anymore. This was the only place that thousands of black people were legally allowed to come together amongst one another and communicate and exchange information. The whites and their offspring recognized that there was something afoot, and they became very nervous. They had already heard about the various insurrections, the waging of war by black people all across the United States. Hebrew Prophet, for example, organizing over 1,000 black people to wage war against the whites and their offspring. They had already, of course, understood what took place in Haiti and various other revolts. So when they started seeing thousands of black people organizing, coming together at the same time, Okofo Kwabena beginning to talk about rebellion and focusing on these pseudo little scriptures, but he had a scripted message, an encrypted message in that. They recognized that. They shut the church down. The black people there recognized that it was time to move. So this is the backdrop. This is the context within which these things are taking place. Kwabena chose Sunday, Akwesida, July 14th, as the day of the uprising because the plantation hands could come down or come to town on a Sunday without arousing suspicion. By the end of May, he and his 4 lieutenants had recruited a secret army of Afurakanu, Afuraitkaitnut, who were enslaved as well as free blacks that was said to have numbered about 9,000. They planned to strike at midnight when they would seize the guardhouse and other key points and block all the bridges. So they weren't just talking about a small-scale operation. Seizing the guardhouse, getting more weaponry, blocking all the bridges, coming in and out of town so nobody could come in, no reinforcements could come in, and they could massacre the whites in the town. Meanwhile, a group of horsemen would gallop through the town, killing whites to prevent them giving the alarm. Remember, the whites and offspring were not, of course, there weren't any phones, telegraph messages, and so forth. If something jumped off, they had no way of communicating unless they sent a messenger riding on horseback to go to the governor's mansion and so forth, and, upstate and so forth, to get some reinforcements to send these messages. These were the only ways that they could send messages of alarm. They had to have messengers riding on horseback. So therefore, they had people on horseback, galloping through the town, killing the whites to prevent them from giving the alarm. They shut down the bridges so nobody could come in. This was the plan. And then those who would give the alarm, those potential messengers on horseback, they would be killed. They would be able to get the message to the militia of the whites and their offspring in South Carolina, and therefore they would be able to rout the whites and their offspring right there in the city. Every detail was carefully worked out, and Kwabena felt that they stood a good chance of taking over Charleston, the entire city. Knowing how loyal households could be to their so-called masters, Kwabena had ordered that none should be included in the plot. Don't include the house niggas in the plot. But the planned attack involved so many people that some of the house niggas did hear about it. One of them told his so-called master. The authorities immediately were on the alert. Kwabena responded by pushing the date of the rising forward to mid-June. And of course, that same date of mid-June is the exact same date that the cracker last week decided to murder our people at the church founded by Okofo Kwabena and his other colleagues, because this was a symbol to this cracker, but it's also a symbol to us as well. He moved it up to mid-June, but no sooner had he informed his followers that then this date was betrayed as well. Suddenly, Charleston was bristling with soldiers, with patrols roaming the streets, and guards at every bridge. When Kwabena realized that nothing could be done, he burned all lists of names and sent his followers home. But too many people knew who the leaders were. During the next few weeks, hundreds were rounded up, including Okofo Kwabena, who was captured after a 2-day search. And then they had the trial. So he recognized that he had been ratted out, so he burned the list of names. Over 9,000 people, some who were enslaved, some who were free. He protected all of those thousands of people and those conspirators, the so-called conspirators, but those who were connected with him, his lieutenants and so forth. He burned those lists of names. Eventually, some people got caught up, including himself. During the lengthy trials, after the insurrection had been thwarted, the intricate plans of a massive uprising emerged in the testimony. Kwabena and the other leaders, according to the testimony, had instructed their forces to kill all white people instantly, as had been done in St. Domingue. One fact stunned the white citizens of South Carolina and did not surprise the blacks at all. Every black person, enslaved or not, who was approached about the uprising gave it their blessing and cooperation, even though it meant generally meant killing the family they had been working for. And of course, it was over 9,000, the number of people included in the plan. The court, however, proclaimed that all who had been involved had been brought to trial because they were trying to quell the fears of the whites in the population. They didn't want it to get out how extensive the plans really were, and there were certain things they kept out of the court record. When questioned about why he, as a free man, would take such risks for an enslaved people's uprising, Okofo Kwabena answered both that it was because of the general outrage to black people imposed by enslavement, and also that he hoped to free his own children from the bonds of enslavement. So he was, of course, condemned to death. Some of the other people were condemned to death. There were some who were released and terrorized, of course. They were hanged and so forth on July 2nd. We want to give some additional information, and this is coming from, there's a specific article that we referenced in our book, Who Do People, called Conjure, Magic, and Power, the Influence of Afro-Atlantic Religious Practices on Slave Resistance and Rebellion, published by Walter Rucker in the Journal of Black Studies, Volume 32, Number 1, September 2001, pages 84 to 103. And if you go to page 16 in that particular text, and give me a second right quick. Actually, no, go to page 9 in that particular text. We put the link. We're going to put the link once again in the chat room. We had published this, put this article up on our Akumasa page on scribe.com so that you can download that link. You can get to that article, and we'll put the link in there. All right. On page 9, conjurers and other African spiritualists were present in a variety of North American conspiracies and plots, including important examples in New York City in 12,741 or 1741, Richmond in 12,800 or 1800, and Charleston in 12,822 or 1822. In terms of the Charleston, South Carolina conspiracy initiated by Okofo Kwabena, so-called Denmark Vesey, the involvement of 3 separate conjurers in the planning and the recruiting phases further demonstrates the notion that conjurers could indeed act as a bridge between Africans from various ethnic groups. The first conjurer, called Gullah Jack, was perhaps the conspiracy's most important leader, next to Okofo Kwabena Vesey. Also known as Cooter Jack, he had a multi-dimensional role in the conspiracy. Gullah Jack, similar to Peter the Doctor in New York City and the Obeah Doctors in the British Caribbean, provided the insurgents with talismans said to render them nearly invincible. In preparation for the rebellion, the combatants had to fast on parched corn and peanuts before receiving a charm from Gullah Jack that consisted of a kulla, or crab claw. On the morning of the planned uprising, the rebels were to place the crab claws in their mouths, and this, according to Gullah Jack, would make them invulnerable. Gullah Jack was one of the most important recruiters in the conspiracy due primarily to his influence over fellow enslaved Afuraitkaini people, feared by others because of his abilities. This, as they quoted, little man who can't be killed, shot, or taken, was well respected in Charleston and in the surrounding countryside. This fear was reinforced by his threat to injure any informant who betrayed the conspiracy. In fact, even after Gullah Jack was captured by local authorities, one enslaved witness literally begged the court to send him out of state because he considered his life in great danger from having given testimony. This witness concluded in his testimony by stating, "I was afraid of Gullah Jack as a conjurer. Both American and African-born enslaved individuals believe in his powers, and thus Gullah Jack epitomizes the ability of the conjurer to bridge ethnic difference. He was of likely Bantu-speaking Angolan background. He held sway over Akan, Igbo, Mende, Gullah, French-speaking Haitian, and English-speaking American-born enslaved Afurakanu, Afuraitkaitnut alike." So we're dealing with a all Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit effort, a pan-Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit effort to wage war against the whites and their offspring. And that includes our ancestral religious practices because they are compatible no matter what group we come from. And this is what we're dealing with. One of Gullah Jack's most important recruits was a blacksmith named Tom Russell. According to the testimony of fellow conspirator Henry Haig, when Gullah Jack was asked what he would do about weapons, he replied that, quote, he would have some arms made at the blacksmith shop, unquote. It would be at Tom's blacksmith shop that 6 spear-like weapons were crafted and later transported to Gullah Jack in preparation for the rebellion. We were creating and forging weapons of warfare in the so-called 1800s to wage war against the whites and their offspring. If we can forge weapons of warfare 200 years ago, surely our people can begin to forge weapons that have never been created or innovated before, that strike the target we need them to strike without creating disorder within ourselves or in Asasea for the Earth Mother in the process. We're talking about precedents being established. It would be at that his shop, again, that the 6 spear-like weapons were crafted and later transported to Gullah Jack in preparation for the rebellion, but Tom Russell was not only a blacksmith and Jack's second in command. He was also an apprentice conjurer, meaning a hoodoo man, a hoodoo priest. Henry Haig noted, quote, Tom Russell, the blacksmith, and Jack are partners. Gullah Jack learned him to be a doctor, meaning a root doctor. Gullah Jack said Tom was his second. And when you did not see him and see Tom, you see Gullah Jack. A third conjurer played another pivotal role in the planning of this revolt. His name was Philip, and he was described in the trial records as being a blind preacher. On one occasion during the initial stages of the conspiracy, Monday Gale and Peter Poyas brought a enslaved Afurakani man named William Garner to Philip's house. Monday Gale, one of the lieutenants, remarked in his testimony that the blind preacher addressed William and asked him why he looked so timorous, and quoted a passage from a scripture. William Garner was greatly alarmed by this question, this inquiry, which seemed extraordinary, knowing that the old man was blind. However, Philip was not completely without sight. At his birth, a caul covered his face. And according to Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit folklore, this granted him the ability to foresee events. When we say this child was born with a veil over their eyes, and we still say that today, that means they have the capacity for second sight, clairvoyant, can see the Obosom, see the Nananom Unsamanfo. Many of you have the capacity ever since you were children to see Unsamanfo, see ancestral spirits, see the Obosom. So this has always been part of our culture. In Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people in America, we say a call or they're born with a veil over their eyes. According to our culture, this granted him the ability to foresee events and communicate with the spirit world. In his own testimony, Philip claimed that being born with the call gave him the gift of second sight, which came to him after prayer or invocations and dreams. Once again, when you're reading these accounts, he can see the spirit realm. When the whites and their offspring are quoting from his testimony and quoting from other individuals, they quote things they would like to quote. but they don't place them in the concept. He could see the Nsamanfo. He could see the Obosom. He knew there was no Jesus. And they called him a preacher. They were dealing with that building, that church, because this was the place that they could organize their revolt. But he could see the spirit realm, so he knew these fake saints and angels and so forth and fake characters, Jesus and biblical characters didn't exist, because he was dealing with the spirit realm on a regular basis. We need to keep these things in mind whenever we're reading accounts about our own true story. We need to understand what the real context is. Although the court later deemed, but they called him a high priest of sedition. They deemed him to have some role in the conspiracy. He was never tried. It was quite clear from the trial testimony that the conspirators often gathered at his house, and that his words would help reassure any frightened recruit. However, and this is the difference between the one born with the veil and Gullah Jack and Tom Russell and so forth, Philip, the one who could see, he claimed in his testimony, he said because of his second sight, he predicted the failure of the revolt. And this probably explains why he did not face punishment. Philip claimed in his testimony that although the conspiracy was never specifically mentioned to him, he had foreseen something of that sort and therefore had advised his visitors on one occasion to give up the business. Despite his rather ambiguous role in the rebellion, Philip's presence is definitive proof of continuing Afro-Atlantic religious influences on slave resistance. So what is that saying? That one of the ones who was intuitive and clairvoyant enough to see, he could see spirit, just like some of you can. And in reality, all of us have that capacity to some degree. The revolt was well planned, well strategized, but he was able to see that one of these house niggas would rat them out. He could see how it was unfolding. The Nsamanfo showed him how it was unfolding. Because that took place, they moved the date of the revolt up to mid-June, but he could see other things unfold. So even though he said in the trial, well, I told them to give it up, in reality, he's protecting individuals, but he could see that there needed to be an alternative plan. So those who have that clairvoyance, they need to put those things in front of the people who are organized. Whenever we're organizing any kind of revolutionary activity, we need to have the people who are understood and recognized and have that record of being truly those with second sight, those who are clairvoyant and so forth, can attune to the Obosom and Nsamanfo, who can see how things are unfolding and developing before they take place in physically in three-dimensional, quote-unquote, time, to be able to give us that information so we can plan accordingly. The significance of the call with which Philip was born has far-reaching ramifications for the continuation of Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnut spiritual conceptualization in North America. So they get into some detail about that, but we just want one more piece from this section, specifically dealing with the fear that the whites and their offspring had with regard to the conjurer. And if you go to page 16 in this text, dealing with the conjurers, not only did the conjurers claim to possess supernatural abilities and charms to protect fellow enslaved Afurakanu, Afuraitkaitnut, these spiritualists were also able at times to avoid their own punishment from white. Susan Snow, an ex-slave from Wilcox County, Alabama, testified that her mother was a black African who could not be whipped by her master. This was due to Snow's mother being, and she quotes, a conjurer. And they was all scared of till the next day to get somebody to help tie her up, then he'd forget to whip her. They used to say she was a conjurer, and they was all scared of her. So you had people on the plantation who would utilize talismans, utilize root medicine and so forth. They would never get whipped. And they would show other people how to never be whipped or tortured. They would utilize this medicine and so forth, this nduru, to wage war against the whites and their offspring. So now we get to this next critical piece. This fear was perhaps associated with conjurers having command over both esoteric and mundane means of retribution. Their knowledge of roots and herbs gave them the simultaneously ability to cure the ailing and to poison wrongdoers. This skill in creating toxic substances made Gullah Jack one of the key conspirators in the 12,822 Okofo Kwabena conspiracy, so-called Denmark Vesey conspiracy, of feared presence among the whites of Charleston, South Carolina. One of his contingency plans, in case the rebellion failed or was betrayed, was so frightening that all mention of it was intentionally omitted from the version of the trial record made publicly available by judges Lionel Kennedy and Thomas Parker. Henry Haig, one of the conspirators who turned state witness, told the court that Gullah Jack, quote, was going to give me a bottle with poison to put into my master's pump and into as many pumps as he could about town. And he said he wanted to give the other bottles to those he could trust, meaning they were giving bottles of poison. The contingency plan, the scorched earth policy, was that if things didn't go down properly, they had distributed poison to different individuals, Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnut soldiers and warrioresses. They were going to poison the water supply throughout the city and kill everybody in the city. Chemicals and biological warfare. Chemical and biological weapons of mass destruction. We have a precedent set by our ancestresses and ancestors to wage chemical and biological warfare, mass destruction against the whites and their offspring in this hemisphere. When you have millions of people coming down with a virus that's born of simple substances from the forest, from plant life from the forest, simple combination of plant life and mineral life from the forest. And people develop and get these viruses, and they transmit them sexually and airborne, and they have an incubation period. And then in a couple of years, thousands and thousands of our enemies begin to fall ill, and nobody knows what the cause is. And they begin to try to quarantine and so forth, but you have thousands and thousands and into the hundreds of thousands and even millions, just like the Black Death in Europe during the so-called 1300s. Once the Black Death of the so-called plague hit Europe, between 1/3 and 1/2 of the population, millions of people were wiped out within 5 years. The same thing, of course, can happen here. And that was just from a viral agent carried by the black rat. The pest carried by the black rat is that which caused the plague. And millions of people died, nearly half the population. That has occurred in Europe on more than one occasion. The plague of Justinian, so-called 6th century AD, wiped out millions of people in the so-called Roman Empire and brought them to their knees. And they went into a dark ages for the next, quote-unquote, 500 plus years until black people came into Southern Europe and brought culture and civilization once again to Southern Europe. So just like that happened during the so-called plague of Justinian, after he sent out an edict to close the last temple of Aset because the Romans were controlling North Afuraitkaitnut, and they decided to push Christianity and outlaw the practice of the traditional religion, even though the Romans had invaded North Afuraitkaitnut and Kemet 500 years prior, and they had been there for 500 years, but they finally got to the point where they said, we're going to end this ancestral religion. We're passing out an edict, close that last temple of Aset in quote-unquote Nubian and Southern Kemet, and Christianity is it, that's over. Then they were hit with the plague, and Rome fell, went into a dark age for the next 500 years. Just as that took place, about 700 years later, the Black Plague hit Europe once again, once when the whites and their offspring began to stir, to wake up in Europe and start trying to extend themselves to different parts of southern Europe and started making their way into the so-called Near East and so forth, then they were assaulted with the plague once again. 700 years later is today. So the whites and their offspring are ripe for one of these plagues coming from our ancestresses and ancestors. When you look at the plague of Justinian, even if you look at the war against ancient Kemet by the Assyrians, they talk about the story of the Battle of Pelusium, where the priests of Ptah were appealed to, and they invoked Ptah. And then they say an army of rodents went into the fields and attacked the shields of the Assyrians. And once day broke, then the army from Kemet was able to rout the Assyrian army and destroy them. When they say the army of rodents went to attack the shield of the Assyrians, they're talking about the rodents who carried the plague and attacked their defense, and therefore the plague attacked them. Ptah, who's called Oboade in Akan, and Sakpata in Vodun, and Obaluae in Yoruba tradition, is the divinity that governs epidemic, using epidemic, disease, as warfare to wage war against entire population. Dazoji and Nyokwe Anandu, the Sakpata twins in Vodun, is Ptah and Sekhmet in ancient Kemet, same divinities. And this is why you'll also find that Sekhmet is also associated with utilizing plague, epidemic, to wage war against the enemy. Just as our ancestors and ancestors invoke these Obosom to learn how to gather that knowledge from the forest, from the vegetal realm, from the mineral life and so forth, just as they did that in the past, just as we talked about last week with Nana Kwame Afrani, George Washington Carver, going into the forest, and he said he spoke to the plants and those spirits in nature would communicate with him, and this is why he was able to generate hundreds of products from sweet potatoes and peanuts and so forth to heal. In the same fashion, we can learn from the Obosom hundreds of methods from these same fruits and vegetables, minerals, and so forth on how to wage war against our enemy. And we have a precedent set for that. And it's established in our own blood circles right here in North America. This is what caused such fear in the hearts of the whites and their offspring. Thousands of people right under their nose, organizing for months, 9,000 people, all bound together in secrecy, connected through ancestral culture and religion, bound by our ancestral urges and mandates to move forward and massacre our enemies. And those in Samanpo are speaking to us today to finish the job. So let's get into the title, Okofo Kwabena. Why are we utilizing that title dealing with Nsaman, our ancestors? If you go to the article, we talk about Nana Bena in the Akan tradition. First of all, the title Okofo, and we'll put this in the chat room. The title Okofo, Okun means battle or war. Okofo are those people who engage war or battle. Okofo, singular, Akonfo, plural. These are the warriors and the warrior said. So we talk about Kwabena, Kumfo Kwabena, warrior, Kwabena. Why do we utilize the term Kwabena in the Akan language? And our ancestor, Saman Kwabena, so-called Denmark Vesey, said to have been Coromantee. When you look in the records and the true stories written about our people, the whites and their offspring, because there was a specific region in Ghana, the region of Ghana today called Coromantee, governed by the Akan people and so forth, they just started calling anybody who was Akan, they just started labeling them Coromantee people, just because that was a title of a region in that area. So whenever you see the term Coromantee, Coromantee, or Koromantee or Koromanti, Coromantee, then you're talking about Akan people. Even if you go to South America and you go to Suriname, Akan people who escaped from enslavement and established maroon villages, and they still practice Winti, the Akan tradition. When they get possessed by the Obosom, they have a tradition that is very similar to Haitian Vodun, because everybody's practicing at the same time. There were different ethnic groups. They have different groups dealing with their rituals at the same time. So they have the Yoruba people, they have Congo people, and so forth. But then when the Akan people come forward and engage their ritual practice, and this is an all-inclusive ceremony, they call the Akan divinities, the Akan deities, the Akan Obosom, they call them the Coromantee deity, Coromantee spirit, that identifies them as the Akan spirit. So they're still using the title Coromantee in their ritual practice. So he was an Akan. So we utilize the term Kwabena. In the Akan tradition, we are named after the Obosom who are assigned to our head region. Because we are named after the Obosom that are assigned to our head region, that Obosom, that force in nature, will send us into the womb and make sure that we are born and come into the world, come out of the womb on the day that's sacred to that Obosom. The 7-day week established by Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnut people thousands of years ago, before the whites and their offspring existed, and they simply copied the 7-day week after us. We established that 7-day week thousands of years ago. The Akan people still utilize that same 7-day week. The 7-day week is governed by the solar, lunar, and planetary bodies that move in a specific cycle, which are animated by Obosom, who govern those solar, lunar, and planetary bodies. So when you deal with Tuesday, for example, that is called Bena or Abena in the Akan tradition. It is the day of Bena and Abena. Bena and Abena in ancient Khmer are called Heru Behudet and Sechima Sekmet. They're called Ogun and Iyami Abeni in the Yoruba tradition, Ogu and Anano in Vodun. They govern the planet Bena or Abena, which is called Mars by the whites and their offspring. That is their planetary home in the solar system. Within the great divine body of the Supreme Being throughout creation, they are the divine immune and lymphatic systems, the forces in creation that execute that divine immune and lymphatic function. Within your body, your immune system and lymphatic system are the shrines for Bena and Abena, Heru Behudet and Sechima Sekmet. So, people who are children of these divinities, who are born under the agency of these divinities, who have the divinity assigned to them pre-incarnation. So when they come into the world, their their soul is infused with that divinity's energy, that fiery energy of that divinity, the male divinity if you're male, the female divinity if you're female. So a male being born on Benada or Tuesday means they're born on the day or da of Bena. That means they were born on the day that planetary body's energy is bathing the earth at the first hour of sunrise. Indication of what took place pre-incarnation, meaning they were assigned to Nana Bena pre-incarnation, his energy infused into their their soul, their divine consciousness, and therefore they have a fiery a fiery force in the head region that's governing their operations in creation. And they're sent into a womb and then later born into the world, and they will be born on Benada. Even if there are complications, even if there's a C-section, they're not going to come out until Benada occurs. So when you see a baby born on Benada, that means they're a child of Bena or Abena. We're going to deal with the characteristics of this force in nature to show the connection between Okofo Kwabena, because we can attune through his force, through his life, through his experience, attune to the force of nature that governs him. And this is why we're utilizing this proper kradin, this soul name, to identify our ancestors. But before we even get to the specifics of the function of the divinity, we're going to read from a text dealing with Bena, Heru Bedat, Bedeti, Heru Bedet, the winged sun disk. This is Heru Bedet, Heru Bedat, called Bena in Akan. You've seen the Wayne Sunday in the legend of Heru Bekudet. They're talking about the enemies fighting against Ra, and Heru Bekudet is the son of Ra. And this is what the text said. And behold, the enemies of Ra rushed into the water, and they took the forms of crocodiles and hippopotami. But nevertheless, Ra Herakuti sailed over the waters in his boat. And when the crocodiles and hippopotami had come close to him, they opened wide their jaws in order to destroy Ra. And when Heru Bena arrived, and his followers who were behind him in the forms of workers in metal, each having in his hands an iron spear and a chain according to his name, they smote the crocodiles and the hippopotami, and there were brought in their straightway 651 crocodiles, which had been slain before the city of Edfu or Jeba. Then spoke Ra to Heru Bedat, for Heru Bena, my image shall be here in the land of the south, which is a house of victory or strength. And the house of Heru Bedat or Heru Bena is called Necht Het unto this day. Then the god Tehuti, the force of nature, divine wisdom, male, spoke after he had looked upon the enemies lying on the ground, saying, let your hearts rejoice, O you Obosom or divinities in the spirit realm. Let your hearts rejoice, O you divinities who are in the earthly realm. The youthful one comes, and he has made manifest on his journey deeds of very great might, which he has performed according to the book of the slaying of the hippopotami. And from that day, figures of Heru Behudet in metal have existed, of Heru Bena in metal have existed. Then Heru Bena took upon himself the form of the winged disc, and he placed himself upon the front of the boat of Ra. He had followers who were metal workers, spears and chains, waging war against the enemy, and because of what he did, he was blessed by the divinity of wisdom, who always blesses the force in nature that governs divine hate, which is Heru Behudet and Sechima, the male and female force of divine hate, repulsion, rejection, immunity. Force of divine wisdom always blesses the force of divine hate to wage war against the enemy. And so metal statues of Heru Behudet were erected because of what he did. And so the image that we have is the metal statue of Okofo Kwabena, the child of Bena, so-called Denmark Vesey. That is the image that you see on the channel when we put this information out for this broadcast tonight. Because he had conspirators, he had conjurers who were working. When you look at the book of slaying the hippopotami that Tehuti was talking about, and he waged war against the crocodiles, the people who took the form, shape-shifting in the forms of crocodiles and hippopotami. And Tehuti said that Bena waged war and performed according to the book of slaying the hippopotami. That's talking about waging war, conjuring, dealing with spiritual warfare, and then waging physical warfare. So you had Bena, the child of Bena, Kwabena, Okofo Kwabena, so-called Denmark Vesey, Okofo Kwabena, the warrior, Kwabena, waging war against the white snarl offspring, using conjurers who went to the blacksmith shop, created weapons of warfare to wage against the whites and their offspring. So we're talking about a precedent set, somebody connected to that fiery energy, the divine immune system, raising up an army of over 9,000 to wage war and massacre the enemy. This text prefigures that kind of activity, and it also shows how we must complete the mission set out by Okofo Kwabena. So let's talk about the nature of the divinity. As we said, he operates the planet Bena. He's the Obosom of hot metal and war. Bena is the enforcer of divine order. Inyamewa, Inyame and Sheshe, the order, the arrangement. In Sheshe of Inyamewa, Inyame, the great mother and great father. He is the principal agent of the divine hate of Inyamewa, Inyame, the supreme being. We talk about order. It's comprised of two complementary poles, divine law or love and divine hate. Through law, you express order. You align yourself with order. Through hate, you reject disorder for the maintenance of divine order. Divine law is the expression of order. Divine hate is the impression of order. Through law, you express order. Law lays out the various parameters within which we must operate. Divine hate imprints or impresses those parameters upon individuals and entities in creation. If you operate outside of those parameters that have been imprinted, that imprinting is also a repelling of any individual or entity who would seek to go into contravention to this divine order. So through law, you express order. Through hate, you impress or imprint order by stamping out disorder and its purveyor. That is divine law, love, and divine hate. And of course, we have our book, Modernity, Divine Law and Divine Hate, where we lay that process out in detail. The Supreme Being establishes creation, above the air, through law, and sustains creation through hate, through divine rejection of disorder, so that the maintenance of the divine order is manifest. Bena and Abena are the male and female agent and agentess of the divine hate of the Supreme Being. Your immune and lymphatic systems are the systems of divine hate within your body. They hate or repel or reject or destroy cancerous cells and other toxins to maintain the integrity of your body. If they did not execute that function, any cancerous cells or toxins would assault your body and take you out. But you have a force of repulsion, imprinting or impressing the divine order upon all of the cells. And when they impress that upon the cancer cells, they destroy the cancer cells. They impress that upon the toxic bacteria and free radicals, they destroy them for the maintenance of order. So this is what Bena does. The divine immune system, the military structure within Abadier within creation, the divine body of Nyamewa Nyame, and thus the immune system within the Afurakani Afuraitkaitnut body, operating through the planet Bena, so-called Mars. He is referred to as Heru Bedat, Heru Badati, or Bedeti, Heru of Mesen, which is the ironworking foundry, Heru of Jeba, or Edfu. He is also called Heru Ur, Heru the Great One or Elder. He is the son of Ra. He takes the forms of the winged sun disk as well as the great divine hawk, amongst other forms. He's also called Heru Desha, meaning the red Heru. So when you see the planet Heru Desha, the red Heru, Bena, it is the red planet, fiery planet of war, burning heat, fire, and so forth, hot metal, forging, iron in the foundry, and so forth. And this is why the planet appears red, and that fiery energy is red as well. In fact, one of the terms in our Akan culture, Ben means to become red by boiling. And so you have Ben and Bena and so forth. Now, we go further. Etymologically, the term gu in the Akan language means to cast metal. An individual who is a caster of metal is thus called Ogufo, one of those people folk who cast metal, gu. Bena is therefore called Ogufo, one of the metal casters. This is the same title of this Obosom called an Orisha in the Yoruba and Vodouan and Fon and Eve culture. He is called Ogun. In Yoruba, he's called Ogu in Yoruba. Of course, these languages are all connected. Ogun and Ogu in Yoruba and Fon and Eve is the Orisha and Vodou of metal and war, divine enforcer of divine order, destroyer of enemies and so forth. Because he is Gu in Akan, Ogufo, one of the metal casters. Etymologically, as we said, the root term Ben in the Akan language means to become red by boiling, to become hot, well cooked, thoroughly fired, thoroughly tested, battle tested. Bere also means red. So we look at Bere in Akan meaning red, and Ben meaning to become red by boiling. You'll find Bena, Bedat, Bedat, Bedet. You have in Akan, which also means one who is sent to attack the enemy, or Bene. Then Bena is the warrior. You have Bedat in ancient Kemet, or Bedet in ancient Kemet, Heru Bedat, Heru Bedet. In Akan, it's Bena and Bena. Same thing. So the immune system is one system responsible for the preservation of the individual. It must be the most well-tested, Ben, well-experienced, Ben, well-fired, Ben, system, or else the entire organism is in jeopardy. This is the domain of Bena. The immune response represents the divine hate of Nyamewa, Nyame, the Supreme Being. Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnut ancestral cultures, the divine acceptance, the law or love of order, and the divine rejection, hate of disorder. And so we deal with that in detail in our book, and we also show one of the titles of the winged sun disk is Heti, which is Heti or hate. There's a title of the winged sun disk. We go into detail about that. We show a great deal of information cosmologically and otherwise. So we're talking about Okofo Kwabena, the warrior, Okofo Kwabena, the child of Bena, the child of the force in nature who is to wage war against the whites and their offspring, utilizing conjure, the book of slaying the hippopotamus. He's waging war according to that book, according to those sacred invocations, through conjure, but also through the waging of war and utilizing metal weaponry, getting the conjurers together, getting the conjurers who are also metal workers together to forge weapons in the blacksmith shop to wage war against the whites and their offspring. And of course, the descendants of Okofo Kwabena and those who were engaged in that process were naturally inclined towards raising up a metal statue of Okofo Kwabena, the child of Bena, just as in ancient Kemet, Ra ordered that a statue of Herubeda or Bena metal statues be placed to represent this force in nature as shrine implements for those who are followers of Bena. And that metal statue, of course, stands today in South Carolina. So we're dealing with an ancestor who organized thousands, who set a precedent for us, dealing with metal armaments, forge your own physical weapons, but also use spiritual, chemical, and biological weapons of warfare. Not only spiritual weapons dealing with invulnerable talismans and so forth. When people are given these different medicines, they're motivated to move forward without fear of being cut down, without fear of being taken out. It's like people were able to overcome and not be whipped on plantations and not be tortured on plantations because of the ritual work that was done. The same kind of ritual work was done so people will go into war with no fear of death or injury whatsoever. And they would simply charge forward and massacre everything white in sight. Spiritual weapons, but then also conjuring the Obosom, conjuring the Nananum Nsamanfo, to learn directly from the spirits in nature how to utilize chemical and biological weapons of mass destruction, waging war chemically and biologically against our enemies to destroy them, to eradicate them. This is an established precedent by our ancestresses and ancestors, and specifically this great Okofo, this warrior, Kwabena. So this is why we address him fashion that we do. So we're going to look at, we have some comments in the chat room. We got a question or comment on the phone line. It's the number 1. And we see a couple of comments. We're going to go through the phone line right quick. Michio on the phone line. You got a question or a comment?
My question in regards to warriors and warriors, every Afurakani male have the potential to be a warrior in a way. And instead of what if they're like say like what they call Koya, like Nat Turner or Denmark Vesey or others that have come before us. The question trying more areas to everyone have the potential to warrior in their own way to deal with things on a physical and a spiritual way. So we see ourselves in this situation.
Right. So now, say again. So you're saying they did things in that same way.
All right, let me formulate easier. Like warriors that fought against the Achiwafo, like from Nat Turner to the Haitian Rebellion, all these people like, I'm not sure if they on the alignment of certain astrology that makes that type of wisdom they take it at the. I'm trying to say everybody that potential, male and female, to be that type of warrior without falling in those type of astrological settings like Okofo, Yao, or that's what I'm trying to say.
Okay, so you're asking if everybody was a warrior connected to different warrior divinities?
In own way, yeah. They don't without in form of line, like that been here and gone, or that potentially.
Okay, because you were breaking up a little bit, but yeah, you people very often, the ones who become naturally rise up to positions of leadership in an organic fashion. Typically, in these specific situations, they will be those children of Bena, children of Abena, children of Yao, children of Ya, and Abba, children of Awusi and Etsi, and so forth. You're dealing with these fiery forces. In nature, you'll find these individuals. But everybody has a role to play. You have some people who may not utilize these metal armaments, but those people are healers. So when people do get killed or burned or whatever, they can heal our people so they can continue to fight and wage war. There are other people who are, conjurers, dealing with medicines, dealing with manufacturing these chemical and biological weapons directly from nature. Some people simply communicating with nature, getting that information. Some people being able to feed our people when we escape from plantations, establish our own independent nation. They can go out, communicate with plant life, mineral life, find out which plants are poisonous, to stay away from which ones are not. So our people can continue to feed themselves, fortify themselves, so that when we come forward and continue to wage war, we can be sustained as we're waging war. So everybody has a role in different capacities. The ones who typically rise up to positions of leadership are the ones who are the immune system cells, the lymphatic system cells, and so forth. Okay. So
that was the only question I had to ask. That was the only one. Thank you.
Okay. We appreciate that call, Medas. And we're just gonna look into the chat room. We had a couple of questions. It looks like just want to make sure we didn't miss any questions in the chat room. And if you have a question on the phone line, hit the number 1. All right, and just give us a second because the chat room information will slide down quickly, so we have to pull it up. Okay, there's a question. I can't figure out why, if I'm connected to offset, why I tend to be so fiery at times. Okay, so when we talk about these various Obosom, of course, offset, the great mother, sister of Osar and so forth, but we have different capacities. Just like you can have a mother or a grandmother who's very nurturing to individuals, everyone in the family. But at the same time, she's a stern mother and doesn't take anything. She'll use a glance to shut something down, but then they'll also use their psychic power to shut something down. Here in the Akan tradition, for example, that people, the women who reach the postmenopausal state, the Chwa Bra, or the ending of the Obra, the Minsi condition, they're more likely to become Abayifa, so-called witches and so forth, which is a derogatory term, but they utilize the Bayi, that higher psychic power. You find the same kind of information spoken about in the Yoruba tradition when women reach the menopausal state, then they get to that position when they're more likely to wage and wield that Aj energy. And that Aj, misnomer witchcraft energy, is the same Bayi in Akan. Why is it that these older mothers have that capacity? When we talk about, if you look at the not the broadcast, but the article series we did on Sechima Sekhmet, Obosom, a menstruation goddess, we talk about the nature of menstruation and so forth, the Obra, the Sechima state. Of course, the term Sechima in Akan means menstruation, but it's also the name of the divinity, Sechima, Sechimet, Sekhmet, the goddess of menstruation. Women, of course, bring forth hundreds of eggs throughout their menstrual cycles throughout the time of menarche. Either they're bringing an ancestral spirit back into the world through reincarnation, but if they're not, they're still bringing that ovum forward, that egg forward, and it's a magnet for ancestral spirits. So sometimes they are still birthing, quote-unquote, ancestral spirits into the community, and those spirits protect individuals in the community, including the family. So by the end of menarche, after having birthed hundreds of these eggs over the course of 30-plus years of having a cycle on a monthly basis, these women have given birth to numerous Nsamanfo who are protecting of the family, protecting of the clan, protecting of the village and so forth. And because they came through the womb of this mother, she has influence over them and she can direct them. When they say the postmenopausal woman has that capacity to wield that Aj or wield that Bayi, they can utilize that energy because they can direct and influence these ancestresses and ancestors who they have, quote unquote, birthed in the community. They have an army. They can send out and wage war against people and cause people to become ill, cause people to have miscarriages if they were criminals, cause people to have all kinds of illnesses, all kinds of things, car crashes, whatever it is, waging war against the enemy. So that kind of great mother or great grandmother, not only with a look or a glare, can shut somebody down and project some energy with that glare, but also these ancestral spirits she has influence over that she has brought into this sphere of activity. So you have a stern mother, but you also have a nurturing mother. You have a stern mother, but you have a healing mother. So this is why you'll see Osset, for example, being connected not only with Osar, but sometimes you'll see connected with the Obosom men, who's also associated with Heru Behudet. And then they'll say she's the mother in that regard, watching over the 4 children of Heru, as a grandmother watching over the 4 children of Heru. And she's in association with Heru Behudet, who is Bena, who is quote-unquote Ogun. So then you go over to the Yoruba tradition and you'll find one of the manifestations of Yemoja is Yemoja Ogunte. And Yemoja Ogunte is the Yemoja who's married to Ogun. And she wears some waist beads with knives hanging around her. And she wages war. She's a warrior mother. So there are different aspects, just like you have a mother who, gets riled up. I mean, that explosive energy comes out of her, or a grandmother and so forth, or a great-grandmother who's trying to protect her children and protect her clan. You have that same fiery energy. So it's not all just about cool, watery energy coming from Osset. She wages war as a stern mother as well and will cut the heads off of the enemy as well. Just like you have fire that will burn, water can drown a whole city and take everybody out. So we have to understand it in that capacity. Okay, we have another call on the phone line. Michiawo, number 5306 on the phone line. You had a question or a comment?
Yes, greetings, Kwesiva.
What's up?
All right. That today's lecture just goes into some of those questions that I had about growing up. That I used to see spirits. Well, I was able to see spirits physically. I could actually see the spirits when I was growing up, and me and my brother used to be able to see it. And I just happened to be born. Well, there's no coincidence, but I was born on the Yah Day and also the Hero Bena Day a Thursday, and it's just strange coincidence, right? I mean, it's not any coincidence, it's just in order. Everything is in order with the fact that, that's one of the reasons why I have to, sometimes I have to balance myself, because I do have a lot of energy, and I got to watch sometimes of what I say, because I do have that energy to spark certain reactions. So sometimes people tend to be a little bit intimidated or hesitant about coming around me because I have a lot of energy. So this is very enlightening, and I'm tapping in. I'm doing my best to tap in to my Obosom so I could deal with my Obosom and deal with this energy right here that I do have, because I do have a force, and sometimes my skin starts to get wet sometimes from the energy that vibrates from within me.
Okay, and I appreciate that. I appreciate you sharing that with the audience, because there's a number of people who have gone through that and are going through that just like you are, and that allows them to realize that they are not the only ones. There's nothing wrong with them. They've probably been told that, there's something wrong, or they're mentally ill, or they're just making things up and so forth. But when people can hear that other people are experiencing the same thing and can properly contextualize what's happening, then that's a great benefit. So we appreciate you sharing that. Also, check out the article on Nana Yao, Nana Yao, on the Akradin Bosom page, and we talk about that eye of Heru, not only the big red spot or the red eye in the planet Yao, so-called Jupiter, but also the eye of Heru, and that insight that you have, the capacity to see, as well as that fiery energy that Yaos have. So we go into some detail about that, and we also go into it in the Oberima Afurakani manhood book as well, dealing with the insight, the insight coming from that energy complex. But check that out, and you'll be able to see. Also, if you're talking about your Kra as a child of Nana Yao, how to balance and mediate that energy so you can utilize it to its best benefit.
Ashe.
Okay. And may I say, we appreciate the call. Okay. Another question in the chat room: what's the balance for the Kwabena people? Someone mentioned that Oshun energy is calming for them. And it always depends on a few things. Number one, the Obosom that governs your Kra, of course, is the leading divinity, and we're talking about in Akan culture, but the same fundamental principles, the divinity that governs your Ori and Yoruba and the Selido and Vodun and so forth, the divinity that governs your Kra, your head, that's the central force directing you according to how you are to operate within the great divine body of the Supreme Being. How you mediate that energy is, number one, to align with that force in nature. You align directly with Nana Bena and your Kwabena, your divinity, as well as the great Bena, who you are a child of. You align with that force in nature to learn how to utilize that energy. But at the same time, we also have a patrilineal divinity and matrilineal divinity, the energy that powered the sperm cell of your father, the energy that powered the ovum of your mother, just like you have the DNA from each one that combines to make you, the energy that powered the sperm cell, that specific patriclan divinity, that Eja Bosom, as well as the energy that powered the ovum cell, that matriclan divinity, that Abusia Bosom. Those energies combine within you. Like the two lower points on the ahinas of the triangle, and at the apex is the divinity governing your Kra. So that's the one at the apex, and the other two support that function. So that combination of those three is a unique combination of energy. And with regard to your energy within yourself, you're learning how to wield the energy of those three in combination. And it's encoded within your Kra. When you look at our book, the Okra complex, we talk about the fourfold division of the soul, the fourfold division of the divinity in the head region. Just like the major fourfold division of the brain with the left and right hemispheres of the cerebral cortex and the cerebellum. Your Kra is like that fourth, like the spirit's brain, a fourth in the head region. There's a fourfold division where the cerebral cortex hemispheres are on the top is the Unkra and Nkrabia, the function you have to execute in creation and the manner in which you have to execute that function. For example, if you're an immune system cell, how to execute that function. Or where the cerebellum is, those two hemispheres, that's the She and the Shibia. The compulsion that you have to wield the unique configuration of energy that you receive from your mother and father's clan, those ancestral clans, how to utilize that unique energy in a harmonious fashion, how to turn that energy on and turn it off. That's all encoded within your Kra. That includes how to balance yourself when you're going overboard. If you're overdoing it with the fiery side and you need to calm down, yes, you can connect with somebody who's compatible to you and complements you, and their energy can balance you out to a certain extent. But first and foremost, you need to be able to balance yourself out. You're not dependent on someone else balancing you out. First and foremost, we can come together as male and female to bring ancestresses and ancestors back into the world in a balanced, harmonious fashion. So, of course, we balance each other out there, and then we balance each other out in the community as we interact with one another, as people are growing and developing in the community and having issues in the community and bringing balance to population and so forth. We work in a harmonious fashion. So with regard to your own individual development, you must be focused on your Kra as well as the Obosom that are connected to your patriclan and matriclan, and you learn all of that is encoded within your Kra. So when you go to your Akradin Bosom shrine and deal with the divinity in your head region, then you learn how to align all of that energy and balance yourself out. And then your Nsamamfo, your Nananom Nsamamfo, your spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors, some of those who are also same energy complex, not only patriclan and matriclan, but also if you're a Kwabena, you're a child of Bena, and you have that kind of energy of Bena, and we talk about the characteristics of that kind of individual and what happens when you get outside of the energy of the divinity. You would have had a grandfather, great-grandfather, great-great-grandfather, or maybe father who was a Kwabena as well, who became an honored ancestor because they learned how to utilize that energy in a harmonious fashion. And they will show you how to balance yourself out because they lived that. That's the value of dealing with the Nsamamfo, specifically, the ones who are assigned to us by the Supreme Being. How do I utilize this fiery energy I have as a child of Bena without creating disorder in myself or the community at the same time? Well, how about connecting with somebody in your own blood circle who was also a Bena and who had to learn how to utilize that energy throughout the course of his life? And once he was able to accomplish that and earn the title of Nana, grew and crystallized into that societal office, the highest societal office in Akan tradition, then he's able to show you how to do the same thing. In fact, he has a responsibility given to him by the Supreme Being to show you and other children, grandchildren of his in the blood circle, how to utilize that energy in a harmonious fashion. Just like the Ajuwas, we teach the Ajuwas how to do that, and the Kwasis, we teach the Kwasis who are still living on earth how to do so. Those ancestresses and ancestors of that same blood circle will show you individually how to do so. So when you go to the ancestral shrine, in Sama and Komre, they will come forward, they will be prominent. When you go to your Kradin Bosom shrine, Bosom will show you as well. So that's the key to that. Of course, in addition to that, supplemental to that, will also be your mate who balances you out, and then you being moved by your Nsamamfo. You're not a known Nsamamfo, you're as well as the Obosom towards the kind of mate that you need, the individual who you need to connect with, who will balance you out. And sometimes people are, and we'll deal with this on a different show, but sometimes people are wondering why they haven't. Some people make mistakes and connect with the wrong individual. You may have made mistakes connected with the wrong individual. So you separate it from that individual. which is fine. But maybe the person that you need to be connected with, they haven't separated from the individual who's clearly not the individual they need to be with. So while they're still going through that process, they're still married with them or connected with them on some degree, and you don't know where they are yet, but you're here and they're somewhere, and you can feel them, but you know they're somewhere, but you just don't know who they are and where they are yet. But you've already made your disconnection from the wrong individual, the person who you shouldn't have been with. You recognize that you separated yourself from them. Now you are independent, and you're simply, quote unquote, awaiting for your mate to separate from that individual so that you all can finally meet, quote unquote, happen to meet, quote unquote, and finally connect. But while you're awaiting that process, you have the opportunity to develop these things you're talking about, develop these skills, develop your spiritual capacity. The energy coming from the Patrick-clan, energy coming from the Matrick-clan, the energy of the Obosom that governs your head region, aligning with your Nsamanfo. You have the time to perfect yourself. We dealt with Subain power, sacred character, to perfect your character. It's natural for us to grow into perfected character. That is the destination of all Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnut people. We're not the whites and their offspring talking about nobody's perfect. That's nonsense. That's our destination. That's something we naturally crystallize into unless something goes wrong. So, because we're not engaged in proper culture. So you can engage that process without any distraction of working on perfecting your character, perfecting your subain, making it subain pa, perfecting yourself physically, externally, as well as internally, dealing with your emotions, dealing with your mental state, dealing with previous conditioning and so forth, eradicating self-destructive behaviors. You have an opportunity while you're awaiting the connection with your real mate and so forth to deal with these things. So that's all inclusive. But the Nsamanfo, the Nananom Nsamanfo, not only will they show you how to operate according to that energy complex, because they specifically were part of that energy complex as well and still are, but then they'll also help you move to connect with your complement and help smooth out things with your complement when you're connected, because they will interact and interface with your complements in Nsamanfo as well. Just like your family members connect with one another when you get married physically, your Nsamanfo, your ancestral family members connect with one another as well to, make sure this union is harmonious. All right. Okay, we just want to make sure we didn't miss anything else in the chat room. All right, so we have about 7 minutes left. We have another phone call we're going to take. I just want to mention, if you want to listen beyond 11 o'clock and you're just listening on the computer right now, you have about, actually, 5.5 minutes to call in, 657-383-0635. 657-383-0635. You have about 5 minutes to call in, because online the show will cut off in about 5 minutes. But if you're on the phone line, then you'll be able to hear beyond 11 o'clock. And we won't really have to go much beyond 11 o'clock, even if we have to, but we just want to alert everyone. You got 5 minutes to call in, 657-383-0635. For the individuals who are not able to stay on, we will be back on tomorrow, so we're going to send out a notification for that. It's going to be an extension of what we're talking about here. We're going to deal with this whole notion of the idiocy of forgiveness, because that is not part of our culture. It's not part of our cosmology. So we're going to get into that in detail. So that's going to be tomorrow. We're going to send that information out. But if you're not able to stay on, if you'd like to support the work that we are doing, you can go to our publications page on our website. All of our 16 books are free downloads, the ebook versions, but we also sell the soft cover version of our 16 books. So you can go to the home page on the website and check that out. Also, you can go to the FECU page. If you'd like to start a study group NANASOM, Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnut, Ancestral Religion study group. Form your own independent study groups with one or more people, whether you're in person or online or a combination thereof. When you go to the FAKU page on our website, you'll see we talk about that information. Anybody who forms a study group or becomes part of a study group, you automatically receive 30% off of our publications, and we have those 30% off deals right there on that page for all of the books. And we also have the curriculum, the recommended curriculum for the study group, beginning with the Kuku Tumtum, that first publication. So you can check us out. And yet I'll say for those who have been supporting the work and spreading the information, sending it out on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all of that information. We appreciate you sharing the information, sharing the free books and so forth. And we thank the individuals who have purchased books recently to support the work that we are doing. And that includes we're working to establish a physical space for our institution. Our institution is already going. This is where we get all of the books that we publish, all of the broadcasts we do, all the research and so forth, all of the free trainings on overcoming transcarnational trauma and alcohol and drug addiction through ancestral religion and so forth. All of these free workshops to the community are part of our institution. They're born of the institution. We're just looking to establish a physical space in the D.C. region to house the institution so we can expand our services even further, including employment opportunities in the publishing arm of the institution with regard to the printing and the shipping and everything else, because we do all of that in-house already. And finally, we also have the entrepreneurship piece, which you can begin today. Anyone who needs work, anyone who needs to generate some income, whether supplemental or just income in general, you can become a distributor of our self-covered publications. Of course, Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnut people only. Simply you're purchasing the books 30% off, and then you sell them retail, and you're working for yourself independently. You're not working for us. So you're simply, again, purchasing wholesale and selling retail. You can start that at any time. You can start that tonight. Go to our Nhoma page, once again, the publications page, and you will see that information, and including the wholesale prices in the document, and we have a little video talking about that as well. You can contact us about that as well.